cup of cornmeal, and a spoonful of lard. That was breakfast for 5. Before the sun cleared the trees, before the children dressed for school, before the men left for the fields or the plant, a woman stood at the stove and turned almost nothing into a meal that held a family together until noon. Number 14 on this list kept children full through a winter morning on fruit that had been dried the summer before. Number 7 was not food at all by any modern definition, but it carried Black families in the Deep South through decades of mornings when the pantry held nothing solid. The food industry did not erase these breakfasts by accident. Convenience brands spent half a century convincing American families that breakfast comes from a box, and the women who cooked from scratch before dawn were the first customers they had to bury. Hit subscribe, because these are the mornings the cereal aisle wrote over. Here are 25 forgotten poor man's breakfasts Black families ate to survive. Number 25, sawmill gravy on biscuits. Flour stirred into a skillet of hot pork drippings until it turned brown, then water or milk poured in slowly while the spoon kept moving. The gravy thickened into a pale, peppery blanket that covered a split biscuit and soaked straight through to the plate. The name came from the lumber camps where the dish fed crews before dawn, and it traveled into Black households across the rural South because it required nothing more than what the previous night's cooking left behind in the pan. No meat in the gravy itself. The flavor came entirely from what had been fried before it. A woman could feed a table of 6 on 2 cups of flour, a few spoonfuls of grease, and a pan of biscuits, and every plate came back clean. The gravy stretched whatever the kitchen had, and when the kitchen had nothing, the gravy was the meal. Number 24, couscous, cornmeal mixed with a little salt and water, then dropped into a skillet of hot lard and stirred until it formed loose, golden crumbles that crisped on the edges and stayed soft in the center. Served in a bowl with cane syrup poured over the top or with cold milk spooned around it. Couscous belonged to Black Creole families in Southwest Louisiana, where it was the first meal of the morning in households that worked the rice and sugar fields. The dish cooked fast and used the cheapest grain in the pantry. Children ate it sweet, field hands ate it plain. Either way, the skillet was empty before the sun was fully up, and the cornmeal bin was a little lighter than it had been the night before. Number 23, red-eye gravy over grits. After the last slice of country ham came out of the skillet, a woman poured black coffee straight into the hot pan and let it bubble against the brown bits stuck to the iron. The liquid turned dark and thin, with a reddish eye of fat floating in the center that gave the gravy its name. Spooned over a bowl of grits, it carried the salt of the ham and the bitterness of the coffee into every bite. Red-eye gravy used nothing that would have cost a cent beyond what was already on the stove. The ham was often the cheapest end piece, and the coffee was already made. The gravy turned leftovers into a second meal without adding a single new ingredient to the counter. Number 22, ash cake, cornmeal batter wrapped in dampened cabbage leaves or corn husks and buried directly in the hot ashes of a fireplace. No skillet, no oven, no pan of any kind. The ashes baked the outside into a firm crust, while the inside steamed into dense, smoky bread that tasted like nothing a kitchen stove could produce. Ash cakes belonged to the era before cook stoves reached rural Black homes, and in parts of the Deep South that meant well into the early 20th century. A child pulled the bundle from the ashes, peeled back the leaves, brushed off what clung to the surface, and ate it with her hands. The bread carried the flavor of the wood that burned the night before. Number 21, hog brains and eggs. On the morning after a hog killing, the brains were scooped from the split skull, rinsed, and scrambled into a skillet of hot grease with a few eggs beaten through them. The brains turned the eggs creamy and rich, with a texture softer than anything else in the pan. Seasoned with salt, pepper, and sometimes a pinch of sage, the scramble was spooned onto a plate beside biscuits or bread. Hog brains were free. They came with the animal, and no butcher shop in town would have charged a penny for them because no one with money wanted them. But a family that had just spent 2 days slaughtering and salting a hog needed a hot breakfast before the work of rendering and smoking began, and the brains were ready before any other cut had finished curing. Number 20, breakfast rice with butter and sugar. A bowl of leftover rice from last night's supper, reheated with a splash of water, topped with a pat of butter and a spoonful of white sugar. In the rice belt that stretched from the Carolina Low Country through southern Louisiana, rice was as constant as cornmeal. It sat in a pot on the stove or the back of the wood stove from one meal to the next. In the morning, it became breakfast with nothing more than heat and sweetness. Children ate it with a spoon from the same bowl they would use for beans at supper, and the taste was plain, warm, and filling in a way that did not pretend to be anything more than what it was. Number 19, smoked salt herring. Before refrigeration reached every household and before canned meat took over the pantry shelf, salted and smoked fish was one of the cheapest sources of protein available in the rural South. Salt herring arrived in wooden barrels at country stores, stacked flat, stiff as shingles, preserved so heavily that the fish could sit unrefrigerated for weeks without turning. The preparation was the same in nearly every kitchen. The herring was soaked overnight to pull out enough salt to make it edible, then fried in a skillet the next morning until the skin blistered and the flesh softened. The bones were small and thin enough to eat, and most people did because picking around them took time that a working morning did not allow. Served alongside grits or on a piece of bread, a single herring fed one person a full breakfast for a cost that rounded to almost nothing. The smell was strong. The taste was stronger. Salt herring announced itself in the kitchen the moment the skillet got hot, and neighbors knew who was cooking it without being told. In Black communities along the Atlantic coast, from the Chesapeake down through the Sea Islands, herring was not a poverty food. It was simply food the way cornmeal was food, the way fatback was food. Something always available, always affordable, always sufficient. Salt herring disappeared from most breakfast tables when refrigeration made fresh meat available year-round, and when the next generation associated the smell with the poverty they were trying to leave behind. The fish did not change. The meaning changed, and the breakfast table that once smelled of salt and smoke and the sea started smelling like nothing at all, which is what convenience smells like when it replaces everything that came before it. Number 18, Potlikker sipped from a cup with cornbread, the liquid left in the pot after greens had simmered all day with a smoked neck bone. By morning, the broth had cooled and the fat had risen to the surface in a pale layer. Reheated on the stove, it became a savory, dark, mineral-rich broth that was sipped from a cup or a bowl the way coffee was sipped. A square of cold cornbread went alongside, broken into the broth or eaten separately. Potlikker was not a dish anyone planned. It was what remained. And in homes where greens were cooked several times a week, it was always there the next morning, waiting in the pot like a second meal, the first one left behind. Here is the part of this story that never gets told. Breakfast in these households was not a choice between options. There was no menu. There was no preference. There was the stove, the skillet, and whatever sat on the shelf or in the icebox from the night before. The woman who cooked it did not ask what anyone wanted. She assessed what was available and made a decision, often before the rest of the house was awake. That decision was an act of mathematics performed in the dark, and it had consequences that rippled through the entire day. A child who left the house without enough food in the morning was a child who could not sit still in a classroom by 10 o'clock. A man who left for the field without grease and starch in his stomach was a man who slowed down by noon. Breakfast was not the most important meal of the day because a commercial told anyone so. It was the most important meal because a missed one cost the family something it could not afford to lose: a full day of labor, a full day of learning, a full day of holding together. Number 17, crackling bread. Cornbread, battered with chunks of rendered pork skin, stirred through it before the pan went into the oven. The cracklings were what remained after the fat was cooked out of the hog skin during rendering, and they turned hard and crunchy and carried enough salt and smoke to season the bread from the inside. A wedge of crackling bread eaten with a cup of coffee was a breakfast that held a grown man until the middle of the afternoon. The cracklings added weight and richness to bread that otherwise would have been nothing but cornmeal and water. Families that killed their own hogs saved cracklings in jars through the winter, and every batch of cornbread got a handful stirred in until the jar was empty. Number 16, rice callus. Leftover cooked rice mixed with flour, sugar, and a beaten egg, then shaped into small balls and dropped into hot oil until they puffed and turned golden brown, dusted with powdered sugar and eaten hot. Callus were sold on the streets of New Orleans by black women who carried them in covered baskets on their heads and called out "Bel Callas" to show before the sun had cleared the rooftops. For the women selling them, the callus were income earned from rice that would otherwise have been thrown away. For the families buying them, they were a hot breakfast that cost almost nothing. The tradition stretched back to the early 1800s and held on through Reconstruction and into the 20th century before it faded from the street corners and survived only in the kitchens that remembered. Number 15, drippings on bread. Bacon grease or pork fat saved in a tin can on the back of the stove, spread cold across a slice of bread the way another household might have used butter, sometimes sprinkled with salt, sometimes sprinkled with sugar. The drippings carried the flavor of every piece of meat that had been fried in that skillet over the course of the week, and the bread soaked it up and turned soft and rich in the mouth. No cooking required, no fire lit. A child could fix it alone before the rest of the house was awake. In families where butter was a luxury that appeared at Christmas and Easter, the drippings can never left the stove, and the bread never went without something on it. Number 14, stewed dried peaches. In late summer, when peach trees produced more fruit than a family could eat or give away, the surplus was sliced thin and dried in the sun on wooden frames or the tin roof of the smokehouse. The slices shrank and darkened and hardened into leathery strips that were stored in cloth sacks or glass jars and kept through the winter. On a cold morning, a handful of dried peaches went into a pot with water and sugar and simmered until the fruit softened and the liquid turned into a thick amber syrup. Served warm in a bowl with a biscuit on the side, stewed dried peaches were breakfast and dessert in a single dish. The sweetness was deep and concentrated, nothing like fresh fruit. Drying had changed the flavor into something richer, and the slow cooking pulled that richness into the syrup until the whole bowl tasted like a season that had already passed. Stewed fruit was not limited to peaches. Dried apples, pears, and figs served the same purpose, depending on what grew in the yard. But peaches were the most common because peach trees grew wild across the South, producing fruit in quantities that overwhelmed small families every July. The trees asked for nothing. No pruning, no spraying, no watering beyond what the rain provided. In return, they delivered more fruit than anyone could handle, and the women who dried and stored it were banking summer calories against the lean months of January and February, when the garden was dormant and the pantry was running thin. A bowl of stewed, dried peaches on a cold morning was interest collected on that investment, paid out one breakfast at a time. Number 13, salmon croquettes. A can of pink salmon drained and mashed in a bowl with a beaten egg, a handful of cracker crumbs or crushed saltines, chopped onion, salt, and pepper, shaped into flat patties and fried in a skillet of hot grease until both sides turned crisp and brown. Salmon croquettes were a Friday morning staple in Black households where canned salmon was cheaper than fresh fish and kept in the pantry for months without spoiling. 2 patties and a biscuit and the morning was handled. The croquettes held together just enough to flip in the pan and fell apart the moment a fork touched them on the plate. Families bought the cheapest cans on the shelf, the ones packed with skin and soft bones that nobody bothered to pick out because they cooked down to nothing. Number 12, spoon bread. Cornmeal cooked into a thick mush, then eggs and milk beaten in, and the whole mixture poured into a greased dish and baked until it rose and set into something too soft to slice and too firm to pour. Eaten straight from the dish with a spoon, sometimes with butter melting into a well pressed into the center. Spoon bread was cornbread for the mornings when the eggs had not run out, and it turned the plainest grain in the kitchen into something almost custard-like. The top browned and cracked while the inside stayed creamy. A family that had cornmeal, 2 eggs, and a cup of milk had a breakfast that felt like more than it cost, and that was the whole point of knowing how to cook when you had close to nothing. Every breakfast on this list shares one quality that no modern convenience brand has been able to replicate. These meals were made by someone who knew exactly who was going to eat them. The woman at that stove knew which child needed more, which one would refuse the crust, which man was working a double, and which plate had to stretch because there was a neighbor's child sleeping on the couch who had shown up after dark. A box of cereal does not know any of that. It feeds a demographic. These breakfasts fed a household, and the difference between those two things is the difference between commerce and care. The processed food industry did not just replace the ingredients, it replaced the knowledge. It replaced the woman who stood at that stove and made a decision every morning that no algorithm and no nutrition label could replicate. Number 11, leftover field peas on cornbread. The pot of field peas from last night's supper, reheated on the stove, spooned over a slab of cold cornbread. Overnight, the peas had thickened into a gravy of their own, and the cornbread beneath them softened and absorbed the liquid until the whole plate held together on a spoon. Black-eyed peas, Crowder peas, lady peas, purple hull peas. The name changed by county and by garden, but the breakfast was the same everywhere. Last night's pot, this morning's bread, nothing new added. A woman who had cooked peas for supper had already solved the next morning without planning it. The pot stayed on the back of the stove, the cornbread sat covered in the pan, and Dawn asked nothing of the kitchen that dusk had not already answered. Number 10, sugar bread, a slice of white bread, buttered and sprinkled with a layer of white sugar. Some families toasted the bread first. Most did not, because the toaster was a luxury that arrived later. The sugar crunched between the teeth and mixed with the soft butter into a paste that stuck to the roof of the mouth. Sugar bread was the breakfast of the moment when there was nothing else in the kitchen that qualified as a morning meal. No eggs, no meat, no grits, no syrup. Just bread, butter, and a sugar bowl. Children ate it happily. They did not know they were eating the definition of empty. They only knew it was sweet, and sweet was enough when the alternative was walking out the door with nothing at all. Number 9, leftover chitlins fried with onion and egg. The chitlins cleaned and simmered the day before, pulled from the pot cold and chopped into small pieces, then thrown into a skillet with diced onion and cooked until the edges crisped. A scrambled egg stirred through at the end to bind the whole mess together. The smell filled the house before anyone had opened their eyes. Chitlins for breakfast meant the hog killing had been recent, and the women who spent the previous day cleaning and boiling the intestines had made more than one supper's worth. The morning version was rougher and faster than the dish that went on the table the night before, more hash than presentation, fried hard enough to cut the slippery texture that made some people turn away from chitlins entirely. Number 8, liver pudding. Ground pork liver mixed with cornmeal, seasoned with sage and black pepper, packed into a loaf and chilled until firm. Sliced and fried in the morning, it browned into rounds that were crisp on the outside and dense on the inside. Liver pudding was a hog-killing product. When families butchered a hog in the fall, the liver was one of the first organs processed because it spoiled fastest. Grinding it with cornmeal and pressing it into a loaf extended its life by days. A single loaf produced enough slices for a week of breakfast, and the taste was earthy, savory, and heavy with iron. The women who made it never called it a delicacy. They called it Tuesday. Number 7, Blackstrap molasses stirred into warm milk. This was not food in any way a grocery store would recognize. A tablespoon of Blackstrap molasses dissolved into a cup of warmed milk, stirred until the milk turned brown, and handed to a child who drank it standing at the counter before walking to school. The taste was bitter, metallic, and sweet all at once. Blackstrap molasses is the final byproduct of refining sugar cane, the darkest and least sweet stage, and it concentrates the minerals that white sugar leaves behind: iron, calcium, potassium, magnesium. A child drinking this every morning was getting a mineral supplement decades before that word entered the vocabulary. Nobody called it nutrition. They called it what there was. In Black communities across Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, Blackstrap molasses was the cheapest calorie on the store shelf. A gallon jug lasted a family for weeks, and it served triple duty: sweetener for biscuits, flavoring for porridge, and a standalone breakfast when mixed with milk. The drink was thick enough to leave a film on the inside of the cup and dark enough to stain a child's upper lip. Some mothers heated the milk on the stove. Others poured it cold and stirred the molasses in at the table. The result, either way, was a drink that filled the gap between waking up and eating a real meal, if a real meal ever came. Blackstrap and milk disappeared from breakfast tables when refined sugar became cheap enough to replace it, and when the bitter taste fell out of favor with children who had access to sweetened cereal and flavored milk from the school cafeteria. The minerals stayed in the molasses. The families moved on to something that tasted better and delivered less. Number 6, fried hominy. Whole hominy kernels, drained from the can or soaked overnight from dried, fried in a skillet with grease until the outsides crisped and the insides stayed soft and starchy. The kernels puffed slightly in the heat and browned where they pressed against the iron, and the finished plate had a texture somewhere between popcorn and fried potatoes. Hominy was corn treated with lye to remove the hull, a process older than any kitchen on this list. The kernels were large, pale, and bland until heat and grease gave them character. Fried hominy filled the plate cheaply and paired with whatever else the morning offered: an egg, a strip of meat, a cup of coffee. In households where grits were the usual form of corn at breakfast, whole fried hominy was the variation that appeared when someone wanted a different texture from the same grain. Number 5, milk toasts. Bread toasted until dry, placed in a bowl, and covered with warm milk and a pinch of sugar. The toast softened in the milk and turned into something between soup and cereal, eaten with a spoon. Milk toast was the breakfast given to children who were sick, to elders whose teeth could not handle anything harder, and to anyone in the house who needed something gentle and warm before the day started. The preparation took less than 2 minutes and used ingredients that were always present. Milk toast asked nothing of the cook except patience and a pot to heat the milk. It vanished from tables, not because anything replaced it, but because the next generation never learned it existed. Nobody wrote down the recipe for milk toast because nobody considered warm milk on bread a recipe worth preserving. But the people who received it when they were small and sick and frightened never forgot the taste. Number 4, leftover rice fried with an egg. Cold rice from last night's pot, broken apart in a hot skillet, greased with lard, and stirred with a cracked egg until the egg coated the grains and set into small curds. The rice crisped at the edges where it pressed against the iron, and the egg held everything together into a rough golden mass that came out of the pan in one piece if the cook was practiced. This was the 5-minute breakfast of rice country, the morning solution for a pot that still held 2 cups of yesterday's supper and a woman who needed every one of those 5 minutes for something else. Number 3, a biscuit dipped in coffee, not eaten with coffee, dipped in it. The biscuit was yesterday's, gone stale overnight, too hard to eat on its own without risking a tooth. Dipped in a cup of hot black coffee, it softened just enough to chew, and the coffee soaked into the crumb and flavored it with bitterness and warmth. This was the breakfast of old men and old women who sat at the table alone after everyone else had left the house. 1 biscuit and 1 cup of coffee, consumed slowly with no urgency and no audience. The dipping was not a technique, it was a rhythm, the pace of a morning that belonged entirely to the person holding the cup. Number 2, sweet potato and buttermilk. A roasted sweet potato left over from the night before, peeled and broken apart in a bowl, then cold buttermilk poured over it, and the whole thing mashed together with a fork until it turned into a rough, cool porridge, sometimes sweetened with a drizzle of molasses, sometimes eaten plain. The sweet potato gave the bowl its body and its sugar. The buttermilk gave it acid and liquid enough to eat with a spoon. No fire needed, no time spent. Sweet potatoes grew in nearly every garden plot in the rural South, and buttermilk was what remained after the butter was churned. A breakfast assembled entirely from what the land and the cow already provided, eaten cold and standing up if the morning demanded it. Number 1, parched corn, dried kernels of field corn, placed in a dry skillet over low heat and stirred slowly until they darkened and cracked and gave off a smell halfway between toast and wood smoke. No oil, no salt, no water, just the corn and the fire. Eaten by the handful, the kernels were hard enough to test a tooth and plain enough to test the will of anyone expecting flavor. Parched corn was the oldest breakfast on this list by centuries. It predated every skillet, every biscuit, every kitchen with a door and a roof. Enslaved people carried parched corn in cloth sacks when they were marched between plantations and when they ran north. It was the food of the road, the food of last resort, the food that weighed almost nothing and lasted indefinitely. A mother who placed a handful of parched corn into her child's palm before school was reaching back through generations to the same motion made by women who had nothing else to offer and offered it anyway. The corn did not change. The hunger did not change. The open hand did not change. Everything else on this list grew from this single ancient handful, and everything on this list was an attempt to turn that handful into something more.
Okra fritters were once a common breakfast food that made use of one of the most iconic crops in African American gardens. Fresh okra would be chopped, mixed with cornmeal and seasoning, and fried in small patties until golden brown. The result was crisp on the outside, tender on the inside, and full of earthy flavor that paired perfectly with hot coffee or milk. For families, okra fritters were both affordable and filling, using whatever the garden provided in abundance. They could be eaten plain with cane syrup or alongside eggs, making them versatile as well as practical. The dish reflected the deep agricultural roots of African American communities, where nothing grown went to waste. It was also a way of starting the day with something satisfying before long hours of labor. While okra remains popular in Southern cooking, the fritter form has faded from breakfast tables, leaving behind only the memory of mornings built on thrift and flavor. Red-eye ham and coffee gravy provided a bold, bracing start to the morning with a flavor that lingered long after breakfast was done. Thick slices of country-cured ham were seared in a heavy skillet until their edges browned and their fat rendered into a savory base. Into that sizzling pan went black coffee, which deglazed the salty bits and created a thin, smoky gravy. The sharp bitterness of coffee balanced the ham's rich saltiness, producing a sauce both surprising and addictive. Poured over warm biscuits or spooned onto grits, the gravy soaked in and carried a gentle caffeine kick that woke up the senses. Families across the South prized this dish for its simplicity and strength, a reminder of farm mornings when nothing went to waste. Red-eye ham and coffee gravy reflected the ingenuity of African American cooks who transformed pantry basics into something unforgettable, a breakfast that spoke of resilience and tradition with every deep, savory bite.
Wild berry dumplings were a breakfast that came from the land during summer months when berries ripened along fence lines. Blackberries or mulberries were gathered early, often by children who knew the best patches. The berries were simmered into a sweet syrup. Then simple dumplings of flour and water were dropped into the bubbling pot. As they cooked, the dumplings soaked up the juice, becoming plump, soft, and comforting. This was not a dish from restaurants, but one that carried the taste of summer mornings in rural communities. It was affordable, relying on what nature provided and a handful of pantry staples. Families looked forward to berry season, enjoying a breakfast that blended sweetness with tradition. Wild berry dumplings were proof that forage food could feel like a feast.
Cornmeal mush with sorghum syrup was a staple breakfast that reflected the creativity and resilience of African American kitchens in the South and beyond. The mush itself was simple, made from cornmeal cooked slowly with water or milk until it thickened into a smooth porridge that filled bowls generously. On its own, it was filling but plain, so families would drizzle sorghum syrup over the top to add sweetness and richness without needing expensive sugar. Sorghum was cheaper, widely available in the South, and deeply tied to farm life, making it a household staple for generations of working families. This dish was eaten hot at the table with spoons, sometimes with butter or milk added, or cooled in pans and sliced to be fried later as griddle cakes. For children, it was a comfort food that brought both energy and warmth on school mornings when bellies needed to be full. For adults, it was a dependable way to stretch limited supplies into a hearty start to the day, ensuring no one went hungry. Cornmeal mush with sorghum syrup was never fancy, but it was practical, satisfying, and deeply tied to the rhythm of working life. Field pea and rice hash turned a simple pot of peas into a hearty breakfast that fueled long days with ease. Black-eyed peas were simmered with onions, garlic, and a little smoked meat until tender, then spooned generously over steaming white rice. The flavors melded into a comforting bowl of earthy beans and fluffy grains that filled stomachs and lifted spirits. In the 1970s, this dish connected generations, recalling the Hoppin' John traditions of New Year's Day, while serving as an everyday morning staple in many African American homes. Some families stirred in hot peppers for a gentle heat, while others finished with a drizzle of pepper vinegar for brightness. Field pea and rice hash proved that a few inexpensive ingredients could yield both nourishment and rich flavor, keeping families strong and satisfied. It celebrated agricultural roots and the creativity of cooks who understood that true comfort comes from a well-seasoned pot and the love shared around the breakfast table.
Cane syrup. Johnny cakes were a morning staple, combining the simplicity of cornmeal with the sweetness of homemade syrup. Johnny cakes were made from cornmeal, water, and salt, cooked on a hot griddle until golden on both sides. Cane syrup, thick and dark, was poured over the warm cakes, soaking into the crust and pooling on the plate. The syrup was boiled from sugarcane juice, a product many families made themselves or traded with neighbors. During the Depression, cane syrup replaced expensive sweeteners and became a pantry fixture that lasted for weeks. The Johnny cakes were quick to make, requiring only cheap ingredients and minutes over the fire. Children loved the sweetness, while adults valued the speed and economy. Cane syrup Johnny cakes carried comfort and practicality, filling bellies without emptying pockets.
Cane syrup biscuits were a breakfast treat that balanced simplicity with pure comfort. Biscuits were baked fresh, sometimes from scratch and sometimes from canned dough, then served with thick cane syrup poured generously over the top. The syrup was dark, sweet, and sticky, a regional staple that families could rely on when sugar and jams were too costly. The combination of flaky bread and syrup was both filling and indulgent, giving mornings a sense of celebration, even during lean times. For children, it was a sweet start to the day that felt like dessert, while adults valued it as quick fuel before work. Cane syrup itself was a treasured pantry item, often stored in large tins and used sparingly to stretch across weeks. Biscuits with cane syrup were not just food, but a reminder of family kitchens and the traditions that bound them together. Today, it is rarely seen, but it once carried both joy and survival in every bite. Salmon croquettes with grits turned pantry staples into a breakfast feast that felt both luxurious and familiar across African American communities of the 1970s. Canned salmon was flaked into a bowl with onions, breadcrumbs, and a little seasoning, then shaped into neat patties ready for the skillet. As they fried, the croquettes developed a crisp golden crust while staying moist inside, their aroma mingling with the gentle steam of creamy stone-ground grits bubbling nearby. This pairing brought together the coastal traditions of the South and the practicality of modern kitchens, where canned fish kept well and stretched to feed a family. Some cooks added a squeeze of lemon or a pinch of cayenne for extra brightness and heat, while others folded in fresh herbs from backyard gardens. Served with a side of sliced tomatoes or greens, salmon croquettes with grits delivered protein, comfort, and a taste of heritage, showing how everyday ingredients could be elevated into a soulful breakfast worth savoring.
Saltfish and hoe cakes was a breakfast rooted in heritage and preservation. Saltfish, cured to last months, was soaked overnight to soften, then flaked and pan-fried until tender. Hoe cakes, simple cornmeal cakes cooked on a griddle, was served alongside, their crisp edges soaking up the salty richness of the fish. Together, the two made a meal that was filling and steeped in history. The pairing reflected African and Caribbean influences that endured in Black kitchens, blending practicality with cultural memory. Saltfish provided protein when fresh catches were unavailable, while hoe cakes required only cornmeal, water, and fat. For families stretched thin, this breakfast needed nothing expensive, yet delivered real sustenance. It carried both thrift and tradition, ensuring strength for the day with ingredients that lasted any season.
Molasses milk was one of those simple breakfast drinks that could fill an empty stomach and give strength to start the day without costing much. A mug of warm milk would be stirred with a generous spoon of Blackstrap molasses until it turned dark, thick, and sweet, creating a drink unlike anything else. For families without access to expensive sugar, molasses was a cheaper and more nutritious option, packed with iron, calcium, and minerals that were badly needed in homes stretched thin. Children often drank it before school, while adults relied on it as a quick energy boost before heading to work in fields, factories, or other labor. It was easy to prepare, affordable, and comforting on cold mornings when heavier meals were not always possible or practical. The taste was bold, with a deep sweetness that lingered, giving a sense of fullness and warmth that plain milk never offered. It was more than a drink. It was a way of stretching resources while caring for a family's needs with love and creativity. Today, it has disappeared from most tables, but it once stood proudly as a daily ritual of comfort. Buttermilk biscuits with cane syrup brought the warm fragrance of the Southern kitchen to every African-American breakfast table in the 1970s, where weekend mornings began with the sound of dough being patted and folded by hand. The biscuits rose tall and flaky as they baked in heavy pans, their buttery layers puffing into golden clouds. Cane syrup, boiled from freshly pressed sugarcane juice, added a deep, smoky sweetness that no ordinary syrup could match. Families kept jars of the thick amber syrup in the pantry, ready to drizzle over steaming biscuits straight from the oven. Some cooks stirred a little butter into the syrup for a glossy glaze, while others left it pure and strong to balance the biscuit's delicate crumb. This simple pairing carried memories of family farms, Sunday gatherings, and the strength of generations who turned humble ingredients into unforgettable flavor. Buttermilk biscuits with cane syrup proved that the simplest foods, treated with care, could turn an ordinary morning into a celebration of heritage and home. Sweet potato coffee cake was a breakfast that carried warmth, thrift, and community in every slice. Families would mash leftover sweet potatoes into the batter, seasoning it with cinnamon, nutmeg, and sometimes cloves before baking it in heavy cast-iron pans that gave it a perfect crust. The result was moist and spiced, with a natural sweetness that came not from sugar, but from the potatoes themselves, making it both healthy and filling. It was often served at church gatherings or Sunday breakfasts when a little something special was needed on the table to bring people together. The dish reflected African-American traditions of stretching what was available into something memorable, proving that nothing went to waste in kitchens where creativity was survival. Sweet potatoes were plentiful and affordable, making them an easy way to feed a family while also adding vitamins and nourishment to the meal. The cake was often paired with coffee, hot milk, or even molasses drinks, making it a centerpiece of mornings that were simple yet comforting. Though it is rarely baked today, this coffee cake once carried generations through hard times and sweet mornings alike, leaving memories of warmth, family, and resilience with every bite. Molasses oatmeal filled kitchens with the deep aroma of Blackstrap sweetness, offering an iron-rich start that was both frugal and indulgent. Old-fashioned oats simmered slowly in milk or water until creamy, then received a generous spoonful of thick sorghum or Blackstrap molasses. The dark syrup melted into the oats, tinting them a warm brown and adding a flavor both smoky and sweet. Many families used molasses not only for its taste, but also for its mineral strength, a natural source of iron and energy. Some sprinkled chopped nuts or sliced bananas on top for extra texture, while others added a pinch of cinnamon for gentle spice. Molasses oatmeal spoke to a time when nourishment and economy were equally important, turning a humble grain into a breakfast that felt rich and sustaining. It remained a quiet favorite of African-American households, a reminder that even the simplest bowls could carry history, health, and the comforting weight of tradition with every spoonful. Hogshead hash was a breakfast that spoke to the no-waste mentality of African-American cooking traditions that valued resourcefulness and respect for food. When a hog was butchered, nothing was left unused, and the head provided meat that could be stewed, chopped, seasoned, and fried into hearty dishes. Families would mix the shredded meat with potatoes, onions, and sometimes peppers, Then cook it together in a skillet until browned, crispy, and richly flavored. The flavor was intense, smoky, and savory, and it filled the house with a smell that lingered long after breakfast was finished. It was not just food, but a reminder of how creativity and resourcefulness made survival possible in communities where every scrap mattered. Children grew up eating it without complaint because it was hearty, flavorful, and kept them full through school, farm work, or chores. Adults relied on it as a way to honor the animal by using every part of it, ensuring nothing went to waste. Though hog's head hash has nearly vanished from today's kitchens, it once stood as a powerful symbol of resilience, thrift, and respect for tradition that sustained families. Catfish and grits gave weekend mornings a soulful edge, pairing crisp fried fish with creamy stone-ground grits in a combination that felt both rustic and celebratory. Fresh river catfish fillets were seasoned with salt, pepper, and a dusting of cornmeal before sliding into hot oil where they sizzled to a golden brown. The grits simmered slowly on the stove, enriched with butter and a touch of cream for a silky texture that balanced the crunch of the fish. Families often gathered around big skillets of catfish on Sundays after church, turning breakfast into a communal event. Some added a squeeze of lemon or a dash of hot sauce to brighten the flavors, while others served sliced tomatoes or greens on the side. Catfish and grits carried the heritage of southern waterways and the ingenuity of African American cooks who transformed local catches into a beloved morning feast that satisfied hunger and celebrated the bounty of rivers and farms alike. Fried catfish and cornbread was a breakfast plate that reflected the abundance of rivers and the skill of African American cooks in the South. Catfish could be caught at little cost, cleaned, coated in cornmeal, and fried crisp in cast-iron skillets. Paired with hot cornbread fresh from the oven, the meal was both hearty and nourishing. It gave workers the energy needed for long days in the fields, and children the strength to get through school without hunger. Families often made it on weekends when fishing provided enough to share with neighbors, turning it into a communal meal. The taste was bold and rustic, with a combination of crunchy fish and soft bread that defined comfort. Though fish is not often associated with breakfast today, fried catfish and cornbread once stood proudly on morning tables. It remains a reflection of resilience and resourcefulness, showing how nature and tradition came together to sustain communities. Hot water cornbread patties delivered the satisfying crunch of cast iron frying to countless Delta kitchens, where cornmeal was as common as morning sun. Cooks stirred hot water into fine cornmeal until the mixture held together, then shaped it by hand and slid it into shimmering oil. The patties sizzled and crisped, forming a browned crust that gave way to a tender interior. The method required no milk or eggs, only the steady skill of a practiced hand, making it accessible and quick. Families ate these cornbread rounds with eggs, greens, or a simple drizzle of honey when sugar was scarce. In many homes, the sound of batter hitting hot oil signaled breakfast was ready, filling the air with the nutty aroma of toasting corn. Hot water cornbread patties celebrated resourcefulness and flavor, reminding everyone that the best dishes often came from the simplest combinations of grain, heat, and love, passed down through generations of African American cooks.
The kitchens are quieter now. Most of the women who stood at those stoves before dawn are gone, and the skillets that held these meals sit in cabinets or at flea markets where nobody knows what they once produced. If your family cooked any of these breakfasts, name it in the comments. Name who made it, name the kitchen, and whether the handle of the skillet was wrapped in a towel because it burned bare hands. These women turned cornmeal and grease and the stubborn will to keep a family fed into something that held a household upright through mornings that were never going to be easy. They did it without a recipe, without recognition, and without once sitting down to eat before everyone else was fed. Name the woman who fed you. She has earned it.